Hopefully everyone can see. Hi everyone, I'm Giles, and as Dalibor mentioned, this talk is all about sort of agile leadership for the future. And obviously, hope you're having as nice weather as we are possibly here in the United Kingdom. I hope everyone at this conference is obviously safe and well and relaxed as possible in this crazy period we are having in our lives that most people seem to have mentioned at some point or another during the conference this week. So this afternoon's talk stems from my experiences, successes and failures leading agile adoptions over the last 10 plus years, working with executive teams that have been both united and wholly disconnected at the same time, understanding the journey that agile leadership has been on and where it is actually today. What's a bit of a pivot on the title of the talk I'm going to be highlighting is 5 common challenges that agile leaders frequently face in the workplace when trying to create an environment which allows agile to succeed. And these challenges create the most amount of friction with our jobs daily and need resolving in the present before agile leadership in the future can evolve further. As I'm going to mention often, the Agile Manifesto has been around for nearly 20 years, and yet we're still experiencing issues with agile ways of working that we were facing back in 2010 or even earlier. Agile leadership in 2030 will be no different from now unless we resolve these challenges first of all. Now, I'm passionate about responsible leadership in the workplace, and I've spent the last few years trying to give back to the Agile community by sharing learnings, the mistakes I've made, and telling stories of the importance of having the right leadership from the top down. So as I mentioned, the purpose of this talk is to look at some of the challenges that are limiting Agile leadership in the present before agile leadership in the future evolves further. In understanding what and where agile leadership needs to be in 2020 and beyond, we need to understand where agile may be perceived to be today as it enters its 3rd decade in our organizations. And I often share these thought-provoking perceptions that are from both those inside and outside the agile community at talks and conferences just like this to see how they match to the experience of the agile experts in the audience. So how is agile perceived today? Is it a cult or ideology? Is it the goal? As just about doing agile? As all about being prescriptive and bureaucratic? As being fake? As only about implementing parts of the process? A tool for software development only? All about scaling and brands and methodologies and transformations and all of those other amazing buzzwords we have? As the whole answer? As a tick in the box exercise? Just about qualifications? Or as agile theatre? I hope the answer to all of those is no. So I'm here this afternoon to share some of the things that I've repeatedly experienced in my career that limit the success of agile leadership in the workplace. And this is going to be a real opportunity for us all to collaborate and help our organizations, wherever we are in the world, overcome these hurdles. So to understand why we need agile leadership today and in the future, as organizations evolve, we need to understand why these organizations want to become agile in the first place. So let's begin with why these same organizations aspire to be agile. Previous surveys by Deloitte and McKinsey show that more than 90% of senior management in technology organizations are giving high priority to the mandate of making these same organizations agile. Now, popularity of this way of working clearly shows that modern day agile approaches deliver superior results compared to those of traditional approaches, and this is where that aspirational mandate is being driven from. Now, despite this, less than 10% actually consider their organization to be performing with any type of high level of agility. According to McKinsey, the McKinsey Global Agile Survey, more than 80% of the people who replied say their organizations have undertaken a digital or agile transformation over the last 5 years. However, a mere 16% have reported a success, but only 3% have claimed a successful, sustained transformation, which obviously is truly shocking for those of us that work in the agile world. Now, the results from the respondents who did report a success, the 16%, point to 5 categories in order of importance, all of which make a transformation more likely to succeed. And as we can see them on the screen now. Leadership, capability building, empowering workers, upgrading tools and communication. But there it is, leadership, clearly at the top of those 5 categories. Now, these categories suggest where and how organizations can start to improve their chances of successfully making major step changes to their business. But it still seems mind-blowing that nearly 20 years on since that creation of that manifesto, we are continually identifying the same criteria time and time again in all of these surveys and results to make these transformations successful. But somehow we are doing so little about it to make those changes last. So this seemingly large delta between aspiration and reality has led to many organizations today claiming to be agile in one form or another, when clearly they are not. And especially if, according to the results we've seen, they do not have the right leadership in place to help bring about the required changes to improve on that 3% score. Now, I don't want to focus the whole talk on this particular individual topic, but I do want to share what I believe agile leadership is today in 2020, who an agile leader may be, and some of the attributes I personally think make a great agile leader. For me, agile leadership is the practice of creating change that helps build a truly agile organization. That's it. Agile leaders have a passion for learning, open innovation, developing people, and can create and communicate the vision of the organization they are in. It's also the craft of creating the right context for self-organization within an environment where agile teams collaborate, learn from each other, get quick feedback from users, and are focused on quality and continuous learning. Now, these leaders do not micromanage the people nor create total freedom. They balance the anarchy and strict structure that's really crucial in today's organizations. Developing and, I would say, probably more importantly, maintaining this right environment within the organization is often hard work for these agile leaders. These leaders focus on principles such as designing and improving the culture, facilitating teams to take ownership, coaching these teams to understand the agile mindset, promoting and learning and feedback from experiments, both successful and failures, and co-creating long-term goals with the teams so that they know what they are aiming to achieve. Now, additionally, these leaders have to operate well in a wide range of circumstances, especially new, changing, challenging, and often ambiguous situations. So, who in an organization is an agile leader? Think of the role of the agile leader as a placeholder for whatever you decide to call the role. Now, it's going to depend somewhat on your organization and how you organize your work within your organization. An agile leader, for example, could be a coach, a senior executive, a product owner, a project manager, a scrum master, a release train engineer, a coordinator. The list goes on and on. Now, one mistake I've wrongly seen happen several times in my career is that you don't necessarily need to go out and hire someone specifically as an agile leader within your organization. You may already have many agile leaders. And For whoever's in this position, it's a truly critical function, and it needs to be a key part of the organization for any complex cross-functional endeavor that involves more than just a handful of teams. The person or persons in this role needs to be motivated, dedicated, and skilled, living and breathing the agile mindset and philosophy that supports it. Now, the reason I say persons here is that the agile leader doesn't necessarily need to be one person. It can be a pair or a small close-knit team, as long as they collaborate tightly and obviously speak with one voice. And while it seems obvious, these agile leaders need to not only be strategic, but also lead in the present to address any issues or challenges that the teams are currently facing. These leaders must also inspire creativity and innovation within the employees, so that as the organization moves forward, employees are directly contributing to that success. Now, you can't always rely on what worked yesterday to solve tomorrow's problems. So agile leaders need to use their experience as a tool, but mustn't rely on it just to completely solve problems. Agile leaders need to take pride in being resilient and creative in what they accomplish by ultimately being flexible and open to change. Agile leaders are those who can adapt to an ever-changing and uncertain environment. Learning from this prepares them to handle whatever happens next and makes them an excellent role model for others. Agile leaders constantly challenge beliefs and assumptions so they can meet the needs of the moment versus holding on to a cause that is perhaps already lost. And lastly, agile leaders need to navigate those uncharted waters, the ambiguity, the chaos on a daily basis, all the while just remaining fully connected with the team or teams. Next, in uncovering who our agile leaders are within the organization, their actual leadership will have a positive effect on that organization at two distinct levels, and they are the structural level and the behavioral level. Now, on the structural level, agile leadership will affect all the things like processes, roles, responsibility, KPIs, OKRs, and so on. And on the behavioral level, it refers to specific actions being taken by these agile leaders in certain situations that are underpinned by particular mindsets and abilities. So taken together, these structural and behavioral effects mutually reinforce each other and create a leadership experience that extends its influence, hopefully across the entirety of the organization. Now, talking of influence, the following points for me are key to understanding the role of the agile leader. Leaders and managers both mobilize people and resources and explain the vision. But that's where the similarities end. Leaders focus on goals. Managers focus on tasks. Leaders take risks. Managers mitigate risks. Leaders sell it. Managers tell it. Leaders go against the grain. Managers go with the flow. Leaders motivate. Managers approve. Leaders inspire trust. Managers expect control. Leaders foster ideas. Managers assign tasks. Leaders innovate. Managers use what works. So this leads nicely onto the challenges that I mentioned at the start. As I often do at conferences on topics I'm passionate about, I like to share the most common, most often experienced, and possibly hardest challenges that I see or face most often in my career, that are limitations or blockers for me in my quest for being an agile leader, and enabling agility the best way possible throughout organizations. I'm not necessarily providing solutions for these, but I'm going to share and highlight the challenges and some of the things we can do to limit them, which you will see follows a well-trodden path of recurring patterns, which then become opportunities for us all as an agile community to help truly solve these together. Now, I'm going to explain more about that and how you can help with this at the end of the talk. So, challenge number 1, where organizations wrongly claim to be agile. Now, the term agile is applied to organizations or are parts of that have no substantive claim to any kind of agility whatsoever. And this usage wrongly leads to many organizations being called agile, even though they are still managed with traditional bureaucracy without any true agile leadership. This over-eagerness to self-identify as agile has created fake agile, or as I said earlier, agile theatre, among organizations that really do not understand, apologies, or simply choose to ignore the true application of agility. And to understand whether an organization is agile, you have to look beyond what they're simply telling you to your face, and you have to really understand how they are operating. Some of the most successful organizations that have implemented an agile way of working don't even use the standard terminology of agile, or even worry about calling themselves agile at all. This is also known as agile without the label. Now, their business agility, coupled with great leadership, is an important reason why they've become the most valuable organizations in the world. This uncomplimentary phrase, agile in name only, applies to organizations that just have too narrow a focus, are only implementing parts of the agile processes while ignoring leadership, culture, structures, and governance, and also without embracing the agile philosophy and values, which obviously are shared and embodied by the agile leaders. To avoid uncomfortable scrutiny, some organizations even cover themselves in agile camouflage, borrowing the ceremonies and vernacular of those agile methods and frameworks without fundamentally changing their underlying work habits or having the correct leaders in place to change this. And ultimately, these organizations are simply doing agile without truly being agile. And there is often a lack of commitment throughout that organization. They don't understand why the change is happening, and for some unknown reason are not committing to actually achieving it successfully. As mentioned earlier, this claim by organizations calling themselves agile can never be genuine if they do not have the right leadership sharing that agile philosophy and set of values, enabling the required change and evolution. To be truly agile, an organization today needs to operate in a very different way, with leadership, values, and norms all reinforcing that philosophy and culture. If you're an agile leader coming into an organization that is resisting change and operating by doing agile in name only, this is a substantial hurdle to overcome. It may be even impossible. Challenge number 2, where agile is for the software teams only. The Agile Manifesto and corresponding principles were originally written for the context of software development, and it was intended to address issues that the software teams were facing in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Now, the fact that the wording of the manifesto is limited to software development is less than adequate as a definition of modern business or organizational agility for today and the future, meaning that there's still a very real need for that manifesto to evolve further. When agile processes are introduced, or sometimes forced upon, software teams in those traditionally managed organizations, without the right coaching or leadership, they inevitably run into conflict with the other parts and departments of that business that have more bureaucracy and are less flexible to change. Organizations will still be behaving in exactly the same way in 2030 unless we work together to bring about major changes to organizational design and current ways of thinking today. Because the current version and most widely shared definition of Agile is all about software development, senior management often become confused asking, isn't Agile just for software only? Now, as I have personally experienced far too often, certain non-Agile leaders of an organization undergoing a change or evolution or transformation or whatever you and your organization call it, think all that's involved is the software team's learning a new framework. And as an Agile leader, I've had to coach many senior managers and executives on foundation courses of Agile to help them understand what it is actually all about. Therefore, understanding the Agile philosophy and being able to manifest those values at all business levels is critical for the Agile leader to help build and grow that truly Agile organization now and in the future. So, in arriving at this software-only perception, without the right leadership and philosophy in place, Agile often ends up as just a couple of pieces of the processes being cobbled together, maybe some sprints for development purposes, and especially no adoption within the rest of the organization. Often intensifying this idea that Agile is simply the coding part, which senior managers believe don't require other elements, departments, and actors involved in that overall process. This again creates a version of fake Agile within that same organization and limits the idea that Agile actually refers to the ability of that organization to rapidly respond to change and to continuously improve. If you are an Agile leader brought into this kind of environment that's unaware it needs to change or is simply resisting it, you need to find ways and try different approaches to enable agility throughout the whole enterprise and not only just have it working for the software teams, to ultimately remove large parts of that organizational friction. Now, this can be achieved by things like systemic coaching, sharing the why, learning from other organizations, introducing communities of practice and experience, finding your organizational champions, but ultimately creating those right ways of working, those wows. And as well as introducing other organizational changes, things like beyond budgeting for finance departments and transforming human resources departments into people management teams and having them lead the organizational change with their broad reach across the entirety of the organization. Now, I personally have a hang up with the phrase human resources. For me, it categorizes us in the same way as office resources or hardware resources or mouses or whatever, right? We're not resources. So there will be many other items we as a group here can add to this list. And I would love to hear afterwards and learn from those who have successful approaches to applying sort of that agility across the entirety of the organization. I'd also love to hear about the approaches that don't work as well. The idea that Agile should operate across the entire enterprise, business agility, is not necessarily new, but it can be a positive thing. I hope everyone here agrees. The Agile business can then become more adaptive, flexible, creative, and resilient when dealing with complexity, uncertainty, and change, leading to improved well-being and better outcomes. Now, challenge number 3, where Agile is disliked by the command and control gang. What's annoying about Agile to control-minded management at any level within the organization, but especially prevalent with middle or senior middle management in my personal experience, is that it recognizes a very big problem lies in control itself, especially when this gang worships at the altar of conformance and are not flexible to adapt and change. Now, this same group seem to have the loudest voices, but lack the authority to make the necessary structural changes and are given misaligned incentives, leading to traditional behaviors to resurface. Reconciling agile execution and innovation lies in giving greater freedom to those doing the work, being able to exercise their talents and creativity, but doing so in short cycles so they themselves can see whether they are making progress or not. Even worse for hierarchical control, agile leadership thrives on transparency. Not from the top down. So introducing agile leadership means exposing all those non-transparent tricks that hierarchical managers play on their subordinates to maintain power. Is it any wonder then that agile isn't popular with the command and control gang, and as such will not succeed if they do not allow it to flourish within the organization? There have been many well-documented situations, you only have to go and Google it, where an agile transformation or evolution didn't deliver the expected improvements. We've seen that with those results of the 16% and 3%, or even failed and was ultimately stopped because of the involvement of the command and control gang. Those who don't follow this group become an obstacle in their mind and not a benefit. And with such defenders of controlism, who needs enemies? So, when advocating a new approach or way of working, it is natural to openly highlight the flaws in the current ways of doing things. If everything was perfect, why should people listen to any of us? And this is where the biggest friction comes from. Now, agile leaders and coaches have suggested many ways to deal with organizations that have command and control management style. For example, by assessing if an organization is truly ready or not for agile in the first place, before even thinking about whether there's a future for it or not. Now, these same leaders also need to be wary of the damage from anti-agile propaganda from within this group, which also limits the success of any adoption taking place. If an organization genuinely wants agile and its leadership to succeed, then the hardest lesson for this gang is learning to trust the agile leaders and the talented people in the teams, then recognizing when to get out of their way. It's down to us all to help guide and coach the best way possible to allow this to happen and to help remove that resistance to change. Challenge number 4, where agile is constrained by bureaucracy. One thing hasn't changed with the popularity of agile. There's still loads of pressure from the top down. Now, I hope you agree, especially as we are here today, but I personally believe in an ideal organization that C-levels should, if not must, transform and promote the agile changes too. And I've worked with some amazing technology leaders and mentors who have done just this throughout my career, and I'm sure you all have similar people in mind too. I've also worked with those C-levels who haven't supported and promoted the changes, believing that they somehow know better when clearly they didn't. And in many companies I and agile colleagues have worked in, it's still often not the case today, where they revert back to the only processes and behaviors they know, believing that somehow they understand how to deliver better than those agile leaders who look after the teams and those successful outcomes daily. Now, agile leadership will be stuck in a perpetual loop and can't evolve if we continue to experience this resistance and friction. And as such, these same executives just focus on snapping their fingers, trying to become agile magically, also known as the agile Harry Potter syndrome, often without any care or wanting to understand why, hoping for a faster time to market, which ultimately never comes for them or anyone else, or just simply choosing to ignore it altogether. Now, as I've experienced, certainly over the last 10 years, there are some in senior management circles, now, no, I don't call them senior leadership here, that don't understand what agile actually is and sometimes don't even want to understand. Now, I recently had a rather ignorant line manager in the CIO who used to say of the agile way of working to others, "What is that agile thing you do?" Even if I told him 20 times a week. Now, I once got an apology from the people we were talking to in a large meeting after he said it and walked away. Now, needless to say, less than 6 months later, he was no longer the CIO. And I've also recently worked with an exco that was so disconnected simply due to bureaucracy going on within the sort of the company culture when I arrived. So this same group sometimes mistakenly think it's some kind of anti-bureaucracy or voodoo, associating it with a lack of control or management, a sort of a chaotic free-for-all, if you like, no planning, which obviously we know is wrong, which leads to a lack of a coherent, coordinated approach across the organization and no clear view of the changes which together lead to those desired outcomes. Or possibly through an element of fear, they believe they will lose control of the products and not be able to make changes to them as and when they see fit. Senior management often experiences friction with new agile ways of working, often due to the education of the journey being taken, even if they're the ones who have mandated the change in the first place, or losing sight of the real goal, which is achieving successful business outcomes, not simply doing agile as some sort of tick in the box exercise to say the company is now agile. Now, the big reveal moment, as we can see, it's not their fault. A fundamental issue for senior management is that the standard agile vocabulary, born within the foundations of agile with frameworks like Scrum, was devised purposefully to be unattractive to this management group. And I understand why that happened, but I do not understand why it hasn't since evolved and changed over the last 20 years. One thing agile leaders and coaches have to be very mindful of is that these same frameworks have offered little or zero guidance to those people who actually have to change the most. We as an agile community at times seem to have completely missed the fact that the people who need the most coaching and support are those senior managers who are in charge. It seems crazy to believe, but I've only seen this being openly discussed over the last few years, yet we've been working in agile ways for nearly 20. Did we all hope this friction would simply disappear, or were we, including myself, wearing blinkers the whole time? So because of this lack of support and education for this group, iterative change has become so fast with our agile ways of working that big hierarchical bureaucracies cannot cope. And in turn, that means that senior management cannot cope with the pace of agile either. Sending commands up and down the management ladder is simply too slow and cumbersome and causes further friction if not managed properly by agile leaders and coaches. If organizations are not careful, these new agile ways of working can wrongly become rediverted into yet another company reorganization, driven by the same senior management wanting to get control back over what is happening in the organization, creating even further change fatigue and making it less likely to succeed, being part of the 97% opposite statistic from the 3 I mentioned at the start. Now, I've often heard of people talk of the soul of a department being ripped out with changes like this happening. Now, this invariably wrongly leads to a negative way of organizing, a woo, instead of that positive way of working, that wow, and will create even further friction within an agile adoption and make it far less likely to succeed. If I was a betting man and I could see into the future, I'd be able to make a ton of money on the fact that in 2030, organizations will still be operating in the same way as norms and ways of working will not have evolved if we are not making this change happen now. Now, hopefully a lot of people have seen this cartoon. Who wants to change? Who wants change? I prefer the next version. Who wants change? Who's willing to change? Who's capable of change? The Business Agility Report back in 2019 preface stated, the report is a sobering account of the obstacles along the way, particularly in larger organizations that suffer from risk-averse cultures, organizational silos, bureaucratic layers, workforce passivity, traditional mindsets, and above all, lack of strongly supportive leadership at the top. Agile leadership throughout an organization is a lot harder than traditional leadership. If you're doing it right, you care a whole lot more. Often these leaders are the filter between harsh top-level objectives and truly trying to motivate their teams, making a difference and enabling delivery. Agile leaders must help organizations and senior managers understand that it's not anti-bureaucracy and that they will not lose control of their products, and understand that they need to help coach the senior management team to understand what it is they are committing to, which is, I believe, is a quote from Deming. They must also ensure they are providing the guidance required and advising the senior managers of the approaches being taken by the teams, bringing them on the same journey. And finally, they need to be part of the success criteria to help managers become senior leaders. An agile leader is by necessity someone who lives and models this agile mindset. Someone who's pragmatic, knowledgeable, flexible, open, respectful, not prescriptive and bureaucratic. So this leads nicely on to the last challenge, where organizations have a closed or fixed mindset. As discussed earlier, organizations that are very agile often shy away from the label agile, or are moving away from a particular brand and are using their own homegrown words, which feels more genuine. The main difference between those organizations that can claim to be genuinely agile and those that can't is for a large part down to those adopting that agile mindset at its core, from its people and culture to its structures and technology, i.e. being agile and not simply just doing agile. And these leaders that adopt and adapt to the continuum of agile will see the improvements over time versus those leaders that don't adapt due to their fixed mindset, where they go through the motions of just doing agile because of some wider directive. If this mindset adoption doesn't happen, then that organizational culture will never improve, even if senior management thinks it'll be just fine the way it is. As some people in organizations wrongly believe, an agile mindset does not simply see things in that polarized view, i.e. agile or not. An agile mindset is that set of attitudes that supports a truly agile working environment. And this mindset is necessary for agile leaders to cultivate those high-performing teams who in turn deliver amazing value for their customers. This mindset is also independent of terminology, labels, processes, and brands, and helps with fixing the perception of whether an organization can truly claim to be agile or not. Ultimately, agile is all about embracing that different mindset or philosophy. Agile is not a system, not a methodology, not a platform, not an organizational structure. In my experience, when people in organization have the right leaders and mindset, it hardly matters what tools and processes and practices they're using, it makes things come out right. Conversely, if they don't have the right leaders and mindset, it doesn't matter if they're implementing every tool and process and practice exactly according to the book. No benefits will flow. And again, I've experienced this more than anything else. The agile mindset is the environment within which teams truly flourish, enabled and supported by great responsible leaders. If we want agile leadership to succeed in the future, then we need to collaborate, evolve, and overcome these 5 challenges I've mentioned here today in the present as a priority, and no doubt many others that are affecting you all as well. So finally, the journey for successful business outcomes. As I've mentioned many times this afternoon, Agile is that embraced philosophy and set of values brought about by having the right agile leaders and way of working, supporting our people and culture. Agile isn't just a methodology to implement within an existing management framework. Agile is all about working smarter rather than harder. It's not about doing more work in less time, as so many people wrongly believe, as in doing twice the work in half the time. It's about generating more value and better outcomes with less work. You don't do Agile if you simply want the benefits. You have to be Agile. When you have the right Agile leaders and coaches, the teams deliver in a business model that generates value for the organization as well as the customer. As Agile leaders, our goal should not just be simply about implementing Agile. Our goal instead is about enabling successful business outcomes. All said and done, Agile leaders are the key to enabling people and organizations to have the courage, knowledge, and belief to be truly successful. So my parting thoughts. True Agile leaders today embrace every aspect of agility, set a clear vision that their team can embrace and own, believe in the mission and live it on a daily basis, build a culture of self-organizing teams, create an environment that allows Agile to flourish, focuses on what really matters, delivering value, help their team members take care of the customers, and lastly, are awesome. So my wrap up. As I mentioned at the start, the purpose of this talk was not to necessarily provide solutions or answers, but to share the challenges with you all here today, which impact how successfully Agile leadership can operate in the workplace in 2020, which becomes a catalyst and opportunities for us all as a community to solve together. And this leads nicely onto my last page. Final question and have your say. What is Agile leadership for you today, and what are your challenges? Now, on screen, you will see a QR code and a short URL. Now, you can use your phone, camera, and it'll take you to a very short 2-minute survey where you can answer this and a couple of other questions as well. Now, the outcome of this research is going to be a report into the big challenges that are still affecting Agile leaders and Agile adoptions within our organizations. Nearly 20 years, as I said, since the launch of the Agile Manifesto, and what we need to do together to resolve it. And it's going to be published in a white paper in early 2021 to hopefully coincide with the 20th anniversary of the manifesto. And I hope I can come back at a future event and share the findings from this research, leading to further workshops, projects, collaborations globally on overcoming these challenges through the Agile champions, helping provide and sharing the answers and solutions, and allowing these ways of working to become commonplace in organizations over the next decade, enabling greater business agility and responsible leadership to be successful. Thank you everyone for coming to the talk today.